morning, everybody, and welcome to this second day, first session of the ESHHS conference. So today we have a session on emotions in the history of psychology with two papers. So the first paper will be presented by Jacqueline Atkin, who is a PhD candidate at McGill University in Canada, and she will be speaking to us about picturing the universality of emotional expression, and this is looking at the arrangement of photographs in one of Charles Darwin's works. So over to you, Jacqueline.
Hi everybody, thank you. So last year I presented here on the, is this working? Oh. Sorry. Hello?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay. So last year I presented on the first chapter of my dissertation, which concerns photographs made by Dr. Duchenne de Boulogne in Paris. And today I'll be speaking to you about my work on Darwin's appropriation of those photographs for his own work on expression. The subject of emotional expression was very popular throughout the second half of the 19th century. In his 1872 book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, Charles Darwin offered a controversial perspective on the topic. Darwin was the first widely read study to suggest that the complex human expressions traditionally believed to differentiate us from animals are, in fact, proof of our descent from a common ancestor. While Darwin did not believe emotional expression was exclusively human, he argued that a distinctly human state of self-awareness allows us to orient our will toward the restraint of expressive actions. Expression is the only book by Darwin to contain photographs, and it was also one of the first photographically illustrated books to attract a wide audience. Published by John Murray shortly after The Descent of Man, Expression was highly anticipated by scientists and the public alike. While the premise of Darwin's theory was certainly provocative, the promise of seeing photographs likely made the book all the more popular. In this talk, I will explore the visual strategies that Darwin used to construct and support his argument that human expressions are universally recognizable across the globe. More specifically, I'll examine how the presentation of photographs in the book drew upon popular modes of 19th century photographic display that would have been familiar to Darwin's readers. To conduct my analysis, I'll look to Expressions Plate 3 as a case study. The composite plate, located in the book's 8th chapter, includes 6 photographs framed by oval passepartouts and arranged in a 2x3 table. The left column, comprised of figures 1 through 3, contains photographic portraits of 3 pleasantly smiling young English girls. Figures 4 through 6, which make up the right column, reproduce photographs of an old toothless patient experimented on by the French neurologist Duchenne at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. The juxtaposition of these two sets of photographs appears rather unusual, especially when considering Darwin's primary audience. Was this sort of presentation considered normal and perhaps even cutting edge, or strange and creepy? Perhaps it was a bit of both. To begin answering this question, we first need to establish who Darwin's readership was. Darwin's book had a broad audience which included men, women, and even children. The diversity of Darwin's readership is evidenced by numerous reviews and correspondence. A review published in the Daily News just days after the book's release, for example, stated that Darwin's new publication was suitable for 2 classes of readers. Quote, those who seek only enlightenment and those who seek only amusement, end quote. 2 days later, a review published in the Globe suggested that though women may be interested in reading the book, the contents of it may prove incomprehensible to them. Quote, we dare not say what ladies ought to read or ought not to read nowadays, but we may venture to hint that they should not be seen floundering beyond their depth, end quote. Despicable, yes, but despite these sexist attitudes, letters between Darwin and his colleagues show that expression was read by their wives and also enjoyed by their children. Darwin's collaborator Alfred Russel Wallace, for example, remarked that the photographs had captivated the attention of his young children. Quote, the cuts and photos are admirable, and my little boy and girl ceased it at once to look at the naughty babies, end quote. Countless other primary sources confirm that middle-class Victorian women and children read Darwin's book. So now that we have an idea of who read expression, we can begin to explore some key questions. For example, how may have the arrangement of photographs on plate 3 helped Darwin make his argument? To be sure, the two groups of images are used to make two separate arguments. On the left, the three photographs of girls are presented in support of Darwin's argument that genuine expressions of joy, such as smiling and laughter, are innate. The fact that Darwin chose to use photographs of children makes good sense, as they bolster his claim that expressions of joy are present from childhood, inborn rather than learned. The three photographs on the right delineate an argument about smiling derived from Duchenne and his publication. Figure 4 shows the old man in a passive condition. Figure 5 depicts him smiling naturally, and Figure 6, an unnatural smile provoked by Duchenne's method of electrization. Together, Darwin argued, these three photographs show that a genuine smile is universally recognizable. He wrote that Figure 5, the one in the middle, which shows the man looking out at the viewer with an open-mouthed smile, can be, quote, instantly recognized by everyone as true to nature, end quote. To compare, Darwin noted that the artificially induced smile is not easily recognizable and therefore not natural. If Darwin used these two sets of photographs to make two separate arguments, why are they presented together on the same plate? At first glance, it may seem that this decision was made to cut production costs. However, that Darwin's arrangement of these photographs was intentional is evidenced by his annotated sketch for the plate. This sketch, currently held at the Cambridge University Library, delineates Darwin's plan for the general organization of the plate. And what I argue is that the photographs on plate 3 were arranged strategically in service of his argument for the universality of expression. More specifically, I contend that Darwin's selection and organization of photographs worked to substantiate the universality of the genuine smile across age and gender. With these 6 photographs, Darwin was making two distinct yet interrelated arguments. The first, that a genuine smile is a biologically governed expression of joy, and the second, that due to the expression's biological origin, a genuine smile is therefore universally recognizable. Figures 1 through 3, photographic portraits of familiar young faces, establish a baseline or reference point through which Figure 5, a scientific photograph of a medical patient, can be legible as a representation of a genuine smile to Darwin's audience. The connections between these two groups of images are established and fortified by similarities in the poses and expressions exhibited by their subjects. Darwin received the photograph of the smiling girl in a hat, reproduced as Figure 2 on plate 3, from Dr. George Charles Wallich, a British medical doctor and professional photographer. Pictured in a dainty sun hat with a decorative band around the crown, the doctor's daughter Beatrice is shown looking out at the viewer with a confident smile. In expression, Darwin assured his reader that the subject's smile was genuine. Darwin was especially complimentary after receiving Wallich's permission to reproduce the portrait, saying, quote, "I thank you sincerely for the use of this beautiful work of art, which, however, will make all the others on the same plate look ugly," end quote. As Darwin's sentiment suggests, expression also included photographs of people who were less likely to be considered visually pleasing by its readers. Indeed, Wallich's portrait of Beatrice is located directly opposite Duchenne's photograph of the old man, who was likened to a, quote, "irritable cadaver" throughout Duchenne's publication. Although plate 3 may be interpreted as two sets of 3 photographs oriented toward 2 separate arguments, the 6 photographs are organized in such a way that they can also be read horizontally, as 3 pairs. Like the young girl in the hat, the old man is shown looking out at the viewer with an open-mouthed smile. Similarities in the poses and expressions captured by these 2 photographs demonstrate a degree of universality with respect to the expression of joy in humans, by exhibiting continuity across gender and age. That said, such similarities also make the differences between the 2 subjects' appearances all the more palpable. While the young girl's hat calls attention to the absence of hair atop the old man's head, her toothy smile highlights the absence of teeth in his open mouth. In addition to visualizing differences in age and gender, the arrangement of these photographs highlights the disparities in class and health that are also on display. Although Beatrice and the old man have different facial features and represent individuals from different socioeconomic backgrounds, countries, their expressions of joy are remarkably similar. The other photographs on plate 3 similarly juxtapose the old man with the smiling girl. The first figure just above the photograph of Beatrice is a portrait by the London studio photographer Rylander of a young girl gazing out at the viewer with a gentle smile. Like the other photographs on this plate, the picture has been cropped into an oval format, showing only the subject's face. Beside her is the photograph of Duchenne's subject in repose. The position of his face mimicking that of the girl to his left, visual parallels between the photographs are established by similarity in pose. The third figure, located just below the photograph of Beatrice, depicts another young female subject with a modest, closed-lipped smile. The photograph, also made by Rylander, shows the girl's face from a three-quarter angle. Her dark hair is pulled back behind her ears, save for a small tuft that frames her cheekbone and draws attention to the point where her index finger meets her skin. Opposite her photograph is one of Duchenne's subject being made to smile by way of electrization. Two electrical probes press into the old man's skin, echoing the placement of the young girl's index finger atop her cheek. The connections between the two groups pictured on plate 3 are further reinforced by the organization of the photographs into this grid-like format, evocative of popular later 19th century modes of photographic display. As anthropologist Elizabeth Edwards and historian of photography Janice Hart have argued, a photograph's material characteristics directly inform how the visual information it captures is read, as, quote, different material forms both signal and determine different expectations and use patterns. End quote. For this reason, physical and technical decisions concerning a photograph's presentation are seldom random. Instead, these choices are engendered by larger social and material contexts where photography's presentational forms make meaning. And these formats generate and retain their meaning by way of, quote, our habitual reiterations of engagement with them, end quote. So which modes of photographic display may have prepared Darwin's audience for their reading of this plate? By the time the reader reached it, she would have already encountered a comparable visual format in the book. A series of 6 photographs were arranged in a similar manner for plate 1, comprised of 6 pictures framed by oval passepartout. Organized in a 3x2 table, the photographs show screaming and crying children. Darwin included these images to supplement his textual descriptions and provide the reader with visual data upon which to reflect. Quote, I found photographs made by the instantaneous process the best means for observation, as allowing more deliberation, end quote. This collection of photographs also illustrates similarities in expression amongst children who vary in age. The images, serving here as both specimens and evidence, are presented as reliable visual data to be interpreted by Darwin's audience. The arrangement of photographs within the plate then guides the reader's understanding of the relationships between individual units of visual data. This presentational strategy encourages the viewer to participate in the identification of visual similarities, and as such, the recognition of expression's universality. With this in mind, it's important to stress that Darwin required something of his audience. In expression, the recognition of universality requires that the viewer identify expressive similarities amongst a group of distinct specimens. As historians of science Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison have shown, transformations in image making and publishing practices gradually established the ideal of what they call mechanical objectivity as the scientific norm by the mid-19th century. They situate the development of this mechanical objectivity within a sequence of epistemic virtues, distinct and historically specific methods of examining and representing nature. From the Renaissance until the mid-19th century, they claim, the dominant epistemic virtue was truth to nature. Scientists and artists worked closely with one another to generate an image that did not record the appearance of an actual individual specimen, but instead presented an idealized example of a species or other natural type. Around 1860, numerous efforts to extract human intervention from the image-making process crystallized into the widespread acceptance of mechanical objectivity as a dominant epistemic virtue in the sciences. In expression, Darwin presented his audience with photographs that, for many, satisfied the ideal of mechanical objectivity to which the sciences aspired. That said, the individual photographs alone could not enable the viewer's acknowledgement and appreciation for expressive similarities that Darwin sought to highlight. In providing his audience with a modest collection of carefully selected photographs arranged on the same plate, Darwin outsourced the work of constructing these reasoned images to his reader. The reader may synthesize the key features of each image and, in doing so, distill the typical specimen from the pictured variations. And it's through this process of cognitive synthesis that the reader can become a participant in the construction of expression's universal recognizability. These plates also drew upon formats that Darwin's Victorian audience would have been familiar with. As the production of photographs increased significantly throughout the second half of the 19th century, the Victorian world was flooded with images. Albums of visiting cards are the format that exhibit the closest resemblance to the arrangement of photographs on plate 3. The visiting card, a 3.5 by 2.5 inch photograph mounted on card, was patented in France in 1854. By 1860, the format had become extremely popular. Portrait studios across Europe and America produced hundreds of millions of photographs showing people from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds. And in this way, the visiting card traversed class boundaries and made portrait photography accessible to a much wider audience. While the visiting card provided the public greater access to studio portraiture, it also served an important function in commerce. For example, visiting card portraits were used to promote the royal family, celebrities, and politicians. Queen Victoria, for instance, commissioned countless cards depicting herself and close family members. By the 1860s, millions of visiting cards depicting well-known individuals were in circulation. These photographs inspired a collecting fever and were purchased and traded in large quantities, much like baseball or Pokemon cards today. Visiting cards were displayed in a number of ways, but personal collections were typically arranged in photo albums. In England, the sale of albums and framing mats for these cards was bolstered by the interest of Queen Victoria, who owned over 100 albums containing visiting card portraits of European royalty. These albums were thought to communicate the taste of their owners. While the initial pages of a family's photo album were typically devoted to cards featuring the Queen and the royal family, much of the book was dedicated to portraits of the immediate family and their highly regarded relatives. Photo albums were generally stored in a family's front parlor or drawing room, where visitors were often encouraged to peruse them. And these albums offered Victorian families a way to craft their own visual identity, tying the group of core family members to the immediate social circle, as well as the larger socio-political context of their time. As historian of photography Elizabeth Seigel has explained, the conventions of album viewing also required that visitors make their own contributions to the collection. Quote, "Every new viewer will have to relinquish his or her card to add to the pile," end quote. Objects that were once family albums expanded to contain a broader social circle of friends and extended family. Seigel describes this as a ritual of, quote, "community and inclusion that transforms the observer of the album into the observed." Darwin's reader, then, would have been accustomed to adding her own portrait to a group of images, organized in a manner similar to Plate 3. Moreover, Darwin's book would likely have been read in the same domestic setting that housed the family photo album, the parlor. Projecting her own likeness onto the collection of photographs presented on the plate, the reader could conceptualize herself as a member of the picture group. And through this act of cognitive superimposition, the reader's own self-image may become further evidence for the universal recognizability of human expression. While photo albums allowed individuals and families to articulate their own conceptualizations of selfhood, group identity, and provided modes of storytelling, they also served a practical purpose: to help preserve photographs. As art historian Martha Langford has elucidated, albums both protected cards from becoming damaged and offered collectors a way to contain and organize their images. What is more, this particular storage format looked to systems of management already used in the realms of art and science. Quote, "An hobbyist's way of collecting and organizing pictures may mimic scientific or curatorial practice," end quote. In this way, the Victorian reader's personal relationship to photography mirrored Darwin's. Much like the renowned natural scientist, she amassed, stored, and organized a sizable collection of photographs accumulated from a variety of different sources. Her reading of Plate 3, then, was informed by the use patterns of the album, in which she arranged her own collection of photographs. The album was a site for the cohesion of disparate identities and appearances. Drawing on this popular presentational format, Darwin prepared a collection of photographs that, by evoking the use pattern of the album, similarly encouraged the conceptual coherence of disparate visual characteristics in service of his argument. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. we have plenty of time, well, 10 minutes for questions since we started a few minutes late. So, yes.
There is a long history of facial expression naturally in the graphics. Ripa, 1602, made a lot of interpretation of faces, what it means and what it should be. Is there no wonder relation between Darwin and the old tradition in graphics?
Thank you for your question. Beginning with Duchenne, the French neurologist who made these pictures here, that was really the first application of photography to the study of human expression. And in his book, he was basically trying to say all of these old illustrations that we have are not as true to nature as photography is going to be, because photography will actually capture the movement of the face. And so I think Darwin is looking to photography because that becomes the sort of norm for this scientific object, if that makes sense. But I do think that the arrangement really looks like the old physiognomic illustrations, for example, like the way that the pictures are arranged on the plate.
My question is not problems within Darwin, but the tradition before Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
No one relation between that?
Well, I think he's trying to dispel a lot of that. Duchenne first is basically saying we have photography now and this is way better than the way that we used to represent emotions visually. And he actually goes so far as to correct old paintings and sculptures and say this little expression in the muscle is wrong, here's how it really should be. And Darwin is kind of following suit and saying that this is the best way to capture human expression.
Another question? Yeah.
I can talk loudly.
I think it's for the recording.
Thanks for that paper. I guess I wonder, in relation to your last answer, whether there isn't a kind of ideological quality to the contention that photography does a kind of work that had never been done before by other kinds of graphic representations. And and one of the things that's striking in early applications of photography and to criminality, for example, or to policing, is that it proves much less stable, much less reliable than its advocates suggest. And often there's a lot of sort of work in the text to kind of shore up the claims made by the photographs, to invite readers to agree that there's a kind of commonsensical reading of the photographs, when in fact it seems to be the very fact that they're arguing about it so extensively in the text suggests that there isn't a common sense reading of these photographs. So I just wonder how you make sense of that, of the sort of rhetorical work done in text to make the photographs function as kind of stable objects.
Thank you. That's a very great question, and I think it's interesting because I don't think that these photographs can really do the work that Darwin's wanting them to do, or what any of these people are wanting them to do, because at this point, photographs were not instantaneous. Like, these are all posed portraits where they had to sit there smiling for like 8 seconds, and to say this is a genuine smile is pretty ridiculous. And even for Duchenne, this patient had a form of palsy that made his face paralyzed, and he had to be contorted into these different expressions using electrical probes. So we don't know that these subjects are actually feeling the emotion that the expression conveys. But I think that there's a lot of work being done, as you said, in the text to try to make that convincing for the reader. And sort of what I'm exploring is how does the way that the photographs are shown help them do the work, because he can't say that, these are actual, like, instantaneous pictures of a smile. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation. I have two questions. One is continuing the sort of like the truth to nature, mechanical objectivity, the Galison and Dawson interpretation you make. I was wondering if you, because as you said, those photographs, they're staged to a great most extent, and I think the argument that they do in that book, the objectivity, is that like not just like in the 19th century, there's a complete shift, but that these values, they sometimes coexist. Yeah, they continue to coexist. I always read Darwin as more like closer to the truth to nature than to the new ethos of mechanical objectivity, and I always thought that that was like the principal example of like kind of like more a truth to nature, especially that did this book. So I wonder if like maybe even if he was neither here nor there, or like he was quite a creature between two worlds. What do you think about that? And the other thing is that like you're talking about the universality, and you mentioned sort of like age and gender, like how these photographs are meant to represent universality of age and gender. But also I think there's a clear element of class there as well, universality of class, which I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, and also how these use of like children and people with mental disorders in asylums, like is also meant to represent something like universality that goes like is prior to reason, things like that, or beyond reason. Thank you. Sorry for too many questions.
Thank you. So for the first question, yeah, I do think that the book is sort of like wavering between those two, what Daston and Galison would call epistemic virtues. I think generally, Darwin is using a lot of woodblocks and etchings in most of his books. This is the only book where he uses photographs, and I think he is maybe doing that because what he's looking at are things that people can see every day when they're out in the world. It's not like you need privileged access for this sort of scientific object like you would something else that's being studied by an actual scientist. And throughout the book, he's like, I swear the photographs are really good. I swear they really accurately depict them. Like he's really like putting a lot of emphasis on that. And I'm not sure if it's because it matters to him or if he believes it's going to matter to his audience. But I think that work of distilling the typical specimen is still there, even though he's using photography. And I almost see like the actual composite photographs. I don't know if you're familiar with them. His cousin Francis Dalton, who was like a crazy eugenicist guy, would make these composite photographs where he would layer negatives on top of each other. And I think that Darwin is asking us to do something similar here, but he's just asking us to do it in our heads instead of doing it on the page. And the second question was about class, yes. So Darwin's general argument is that across the globe, across age, gender, class, universally expression is the same. What I find interesting is he had all of these informants stationed in different countries who gave him answers about, is this how people smile in this country? Is this how people express sadness, frustration? And he got all of these answers and he related them, but he only shows photographs of white European people in the book, which I find interesting, and I'm not really sure why he chose to do that, because I've looked at his collection of photographs and he had collections of many sorts of people. So I'm still trying to figure out why he made that choice.
I think that's our time up, and is it a quick question?
It's a very quick question.
Okay, one more quick question and then we will move on.
You talked about universality of expressions, and I was wondering if it's across all these peoples around the world that they have the same expressions. did he say anything about certain types of emotions that existed within certain peoples or not? So were there different categories of emotions that were not universal? Maybe.
So his opinion on this is really, I would say, like problematic and racist. But basically he said expressions are universal. What is not universal is our ability to control how severely we make the expressions. And he thinks that white European men are the best at controlling their expressions. So like they don't have to cry when they're sad because they're really good at controlling it, whereas a child will cry openly. So the expression is universal, but how strong you are at inhibiting it is not universal, in his opinion, which is ridiculous to me.
Right, let's thank Jacqueline again.